All right, today I wanted to cover something. It's one of my favorite topics, and it has to do with rendering SEO. Now, when you have a website, this has come up a lot lately. Dealing with websites mostly, the majority of what I see is built with WordPress because I'm dealing with local SEO, and a lot of businesses will just pump out a website, and they don't really care about how the website's built or really anything like that. They just get it out, and clients pay a lot of money for it. So what I'm seeing though is I pay a bunch of money for this website, and then I end up looking at it as a secondary audit or as a second opinion, and they go, yeah, I just had this built, or I had it built a year ago or something along those lines, and I tell them, hey, your website has problems. It's got lots of problems. And so one of the biggest issues that I'm running into is with Elementor page builder sites. Now, before you guys, I don't want to poo-poo on Elementor, although I don't like it, but I know that there are some guys who can do some phenomenal work with it, and so I'm not going to get into that, but majority of what I'm seeing ends up being done on Elementor, and this goes for page builders in general. I mean, I use page builders, but I'm very specific about what I use. Now, with the Elementor page builder, I'll show you what I mean. So when Google crawls a site, it renders the HTML first, right? So it crawls it, it parses it, and then after the HTML, it runs the JavaScript and then pulls whatever else comes in. And one of the biggest problems with Elementor or some page builders is that they send in traffic, or they send in HTML afterwards via JavaScript. So you've got the search, you've got a little dude, hey, I'm searching, right? So he searches, and it's gonna pull up. Got a little computer screen, it's got a header, probably a title, a form box, because everybody's got one now, and then a button, call to action. Pretty standard website layout. Now, what Google's going to look at is this should all be HTML. Yeah, I should draw it bigger. That's what we see, right? So we've got, let's do this page a bit bigger, not much bigger, but there's a menu, we've got a logo, call to action button, maybe there's a top bar with some contact info, some social stuff, you know, standard layout. Have our button, form, classic, services, or whatever's there, and then we get into some of the written content, right? Now, this is what we see when we look at the page, but when Google crawls this page, if you turn off the JavaScript, and because Google doesn't care about it, you turn off JavaScript and you turn off CSS, all you're going to see is page with probably a massive image, because nobody loads their logos properly. It's just this huge thing, or it's a SVG, right? So it's not necessarily a bad thing that the image is so big, but this is probably either an SVG or a massive PNG that doesn't get loaded. And then you've got the menu items as a list. Hopefully they're a list and not just some div, which with Elementor, it's generally a div. They don't set that up properly. And then if you scroll down that page farther, you got maybe there's an H1, you have another image, your hero image, which is actually supposed to be bigger, but it's smaller on here because somebody loaded in a smaller image, and that's why the background is blurry all the time on a website. So this is the kind of stuff you have. It does not look good. This is black text. This is black text. Headings are black. If these are links, they are blue. That is the standard default. So when you're not looking at it through the CSS lens or the additional JavaScript, this is the kind of thing you get. Only the problem that we see is if I leave the JavaScript on and I only turn CSS off, this is the kind of thing you see, right? If I turn the JavaScript off with this, what you see is well, the image is probably not going to be there because it's in page builders, it's injected via JavaScript, especially with Elementor. The menu items, they will be there generally, right? And then this image probably isn't there. The heading's not there. None of this stuff is really there. So now all of a sudden, when you turn the JavaScript off, you don't have any of the content on the page. And so this stuff is getting served like this. So you search, you think you're going to get something like this. What Google sees is it crawls this really quickly, sees a little bit of HTML. I've seen one where there was an HTML embed, and it was a weather module. So they had nothing here. It was empty. They had some menu stuff and then a weather module. So when Google first crawls this website, what they're going to see is, hey, this website's about the weather. Like this is what gets missed most of the time. And so you have these websites, they might look good, but Google doesn't care about how it looks, right? As in terms of how it gets parsed. So think about this. Now, one of the big raves lately is, hey, your website has to be fast. And so page speed insights, right? We've got largest contentful paint, we've got first input delay, the FID, and then cumulative layout shift, the CLS. And so those are the primary three, and then pending right now is the interaction to next paint, right? That's where this is going. So Google can measure the page experience. That's what it's all about. But everyone's going, hey, you got to have a fast page. Well, it doesn't really matter in some cases. So I'm going to say this, website speed does not matter when the right information is served. So if your page is built out of only HTML or only schema markup and it's just blank, it'll perform really well because you're serving a page that has your logo, a heading, some text, a link, which is actually a button. You might have another heading here, and then you'll have some text, and then, but because this is all HTML, the page looks bad. There's no styling or anything like that. It looks awful. But because all the right components are there, Google can read that content, whereas if everything is being injected via JavaScript after the initial parse, that's all missing. And Google has no idea what the context of the page is. So you'll have some pages that they look awful, but they rank well and they perform well on Core Web Vitals because they're mostly written in HTML, and then they have a little bit of CSS to make things look a little bit nicer, right? But they're not using JavaScript, and JavaScript gets loaded at the very end. So best practice is actually loading it at the very beginning so you don't run into these problems, but that slows down the processing. That slows down the page loading a little bit, depending on how you do it. So you want to load it in the head, ideally, your JavaScript, and then you defer what doesn't need to be loaded to the end. Deferred JavaScript, right? That's the best way to do it. So you got JavaScript and CSS. So this is how we want to do it. And so what I see, what happens in most cases, JavaScript does not get loaded here. CSS gets loaded at the top, and it's a massive CSS file, and Google doesn't care about CSS. So you have a really long lookup time for the CSS, and then you have all this stuff, and then JavaScript is loaded at the end. It's not even deferred. It's just loaded at the end. So in terms of ranking, Google crawls this because they're not looking at the JavaScript. Half this stuff is gone, right? You have a blank page. You might have some styling. So your background color, you might have an image injected in your hero. You got a guy standing there with a tool or whatever, right? Your form doesn't show up. You have no heading. It's just some dude standing there with it in front of a truck. His work truck or his work van, right? That's what gets loaded. And so Google's looking at this going, okay, I see this image, I have some styling, but there's nothing else on the page. There's no H1, there's no other headings, there's no text, there's no anything, because they're not reading the JavaScript right away. So with this, your DOM size matters, your CSS file size matters, because it all gets incorporated into it. The lookup time matters. And so Google is going to crawl it and go, this is Google, and they're going to crawl it, and they're going to parse the HTML, which includes the DNS lookup. They're going to go, okay, I have all this code, this HTML. I'm going to wait for this file. They wait for the CSS file. And then they're parsing all this stuff. So in your DOM, your document object model, which has all your HTML in it, they're going to go through it, and they realize you've got a bazillion divs. Div, 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 which is just a general element that has no role or context. So they process that, and they go, man, this file is massive, which is standard in Elementor. You get div sanity or divception, where it's annoying. It's not done properly. And then when there's doubt, just wrap it in a div. That seems to be the solution for them. So then Google's parsing this. And then at the end, this takes, like, say they're waiting between DNS lookup from 100 different CSS files that get loaded with Elementor. So you're waiting, say, 5 seconds on this. Now, that's already way too late. I don't remember where this got published or if it got published, but somewhere I read Google waits 15 seconds and then they time out. So this is on PageSpeed Insights. It'll time out after 15 seconds. So now you're doing this, you're waiting, say 5 seconds, and then it parses the JavaScript. And JavaScript injects they run a script and it injects all this new HTML in here. So then Google goes back to the beginning, reparses it, goes back through this entire process again, and then finds another script, right, of JavaScript. We'll call that JScript. I don't know if you can see that. No, you can't really. And then it goes all the way back to the beginning of the search, parses that information again, and then so it does this cycle, this endless cycle, and it's constantly going and finding new JavaScript, and then re-injecting HTML because of the page builder. So now slowly your page gets populated by the content of the page builder, right? Now, this is garbage. So if you have a bad looking site and you don't have all the JavaScript on it, your page will probably load faster. Even if it doesn't, even if it takes a long time to load and ends up timing out, the content, because it's all HTML and not loaded late in the game by all the JavaScript, the content is consumed. So, and then this is especially helpful if you have schema markup, because now your schema markup gets loaded before the page content even loads. So now you've told Google, hey, this is what my page is about. This is the content that's on the page. So Google understands that and then crawls the page later to find out if that information is actually correct. So I wanted to highlight this because I see these websites, I audit these websites, and this is what they look like. It's bad. It's really bad. So if you are concerned about your website, if you keep getting people messaging you going, hey, your website doesn't pass Core Web Vitals, one of the best things that you can do is go find, there's a Toggle, I think it's called Toggle.js. Toggle.js, it's a Chrome extension, and it'll turn the JavaScript off in your browser and then reload your page. And then you can look at it and you can figure out what's being loaded. So you'll see if you do it, all of a sudden, that's the only thing that shows up. You have all your stuff gone, right? Because you're not loading JavaScript, and you can see what Google's going to see on first render. That's one of the best diagnostic tools you have, is removing the JavaScript. And then you can also remove the CSS, because you don't even need it. Google's not looking at it. There's other plugins for that or extensions for that you can use. So you remove the CSS, and now you're left with your HTML sheet. And then that's what Google's going to look at. And then they will parse it. They'll look at the JavaScript. They'll start including that stuff. But that becomes later in the game. And by that time, it might have timed out, or somebody might have left, or whatever it might be. It's a poor user experience. And so now the core web vitals, even if your page loads quicker, it's best practice to have it load quicker, but if it doesn't and you still send all the right information, that's better than a fast loading page that doesn't send the right information. So yes, some people get Elementor sites to load very quickly. In my opinion, they still are not well built. So because you end up with this stuff, div sanity, or it's just messy, really, really messy. And then trying to style this with CSS is a nightmare. And then Elementor does all kinds of inline styles. So then imagine this. I can't spell apparently. So then imagine this. You've got inline styles. So you're loading a style sheet. So you look up the DNS of that style sheet, or say there's like 15 or 20 of them that you have to look up. So that delays the time. So your search starts here. Oh, that's not going to work. Look like this. So your search starts here. We'll do it up top. And then you're waiting, you're doing DNS lookup. Finally, all of a sudden, hey, now you have everything looked up, right? You've gotten all your files that you're supposed to collect. And then it goes through the HTML, finalizes, and then you inject the JavaScript, and then you go back, and then you have to redo it all. But then all of a sudden there's inline styles. So now your CSS changes, which is where the cumulative layout shift comes into play. And then now the shape of this changes. So you've got big sections that are now changing, and the whole layout of the page is changing. And it's all janky and just a bad user experience. So moral of the story on this one is code the website well. Make sure that it's not buried in divs, and make sure that if you turn the JavaScript off, then you can still consume the content, that it still shows up on the page in the HTML. If you turn the CSS off, it still is you can still navigate it. That's really important. So if you have questions about this stuff, like I said, I see this a ton, and it's usually on Elementor page builder sites, or Divi, or the bakery one. I don't remember the names of them, but there's a bunch. So get better code, get a better website, and then get better rankings, because Google can actually consume the content that you're putting on the website. Let me know if you have questions, leave some comments if you are watching this on YouTube or something, and then I'll connect with you guys. Thanks.